As the series begins to pivot to a more action-oriented experience, Capcom will reveal another fixed camera installment. Should it have stayed under wraps? I'm Saggy, and I'll be going over the worst parts of Resident Evil Zero. Resident Evil Zero takes the classic survival horror management loop and turns it into a logistical marathon. Unlike every other classic entry, the item boxes that allow you to access your gear from any save room are completely absent. This means that whenever your inventory is full, which it always will be, you are forced to manually drop items directly onto the floor. And since Billy and Rebecca only have 6 slots each, you're constantly playing a frustrating game of Tetris just to pick up a single key. Heavy weapons like the shotgun or grenade launcher take up 2 slots, making it nearly impossible to carry both a primary weapon and healing items. You inevitably end up turning the main hall of the training facility into a giant, messy inventory. Every time you need a specific herb or a story item, you're forced to backtrack across multiple rooms and loading screens. This adds hours of padding to the game that don't contribute to the horror, only the player's exhaustion. It effectively breaks the tension of the atmosphere when you realize you're essentially playing a glorified moving company, kind of like Death Stranding. While this was an interesting experiment in realism, it ultimately sacrificed the fun of the core gameplay loop. This almost was a part of the previous point, but I think it deserves its own section. The Hookshot is arguably the most hated item in the entire series. It is a massive, clunky piece of equipment that accompanies 2 precious inventory slots for almost the entire game. You use it early on the train to solve a single puzzle, leading many first-time players to assume its job is done once they reach the facility. Because space is such a premium, the first thing most people do is drop the Hookshot somewhere and forget about it. However, the game cruelly demands its return much later during the laboratory and treatment plant sections. If you left it back at the start of the training facility, you're forced to make a massive, boring trek through dangerous territory just to retrieve it. There's no narrative weight to these later Hookshot sections. They feel like a purely mechanical hurdle designed to punish the player. It penalizes you for trying to be organized and efficient with your limited gear. The item doesn't even feel like a cool gadget, but rather a permanent tax on the player's pockets. Forgetting that Hookshot is a rite of passage that almost every RE0 player learns to regret with a sigh of deep frustration. This installment introduces some of the most mechanically unfair enemies in the series. Sound familiar? The Eliminators, which are the infected laboratory monkey bitches, are the absolute bane of many of our existence due to their speed. They have tiny hitboxes, move with staggering agility, and love to attack in overwhelming groups that can surround you. Once they start hitting you, their recovery frames are so short that they can effectively stun lock you in a corner until you die. This often results in a game over screen before you can even get the chance to raise your weapon or heal. Then there are the Lurkers, these giant frog bastards that hide in the water-filled areas in the late game. These creatures possess a one-hit kill move where they snatch the player with their tongue and swallow them whole. If you're playing as Rebecca, her lower health and defense make her even more vulnerable to these sudden, unpreventable deaths. There's very little telegraphing for these attacks, which makes them feel like cheap shots from the developers rather than fair challenges. Dealing with these enemies often feels less like a survival horror struggle and more like a frustrating chore of trial and error. While puzzles are a staple of the series, RE0 features several that feel completely disconnected from the logic of the world. The animal statue puzzle in the basement is an example of confusing and abstract reasoning. You are required to light torches in front of animal statues in a specific order based on a vague predator and prey hierarchy. Deciding whether a deer or a wolf should come first in this specific sequence leads to a lot of irritating guesswork and trial and error. Then there's the water sample puzzle, which requires the player to perform precise balances with gauges. You have to adjust multiple bars to hit a specific numerical level, which feels more like a chemistry exam than a horror experience. These puzzles often halt the momentum of the story right when the tension should be reaching its peak. They lack the environmental storytelling and horror factor found in the puzzles of the original Spencer Mansion or RPD. Instead of feeling like you are uncovering a dark mystery, you feel like you are just solving arbitrary roadblocks for the sake of progression. By the time the credits roll, these abstract puzzles contribute heavily to the game's reputation for being more tedious than terrifying. But what do you think? Maybe you would have liked to have seen both players with a mini attaché case. Maybe you wish the game was a co-op experience. Let me know below. Like and subscribe. I'm Saggy, and I'm also out.